I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. We're gonna cover quite a few topics, and these are pretty integral to making sure that your school is operating as safe as possible. So we're going to talk about a lot of the different documentation that's required. It's going to be overwhelming, and I'm sorry about that, but I'll try to break it down into pieces and parts so that it's easier and a little less overwhelming. So we'll go ahead and get started today. So again, my name is Becky Anderson. I've got a lot of experience in many years as a hazardous materials chemist. I've been an environmental consultant now for almost 20 years. And prior to that, I spent some time as a volunteer firefighter working for a large solid waste agency in Iowa, and then a couple of years as a bench chemist for a couple of really large industrial companies. So I've got a lot of experience in this arena, and I'm happy to help you kind of make your way through all of these regulations. They are very difficult to get right, but one of the things that I've worked on for almost 20 years now is helping schools manage their chemical safely. And that's not just in science labs, it's also art chemicals, industrial, automotive chemicals, facilities chemicals. So I'm happy to help you out. And we'll go through today and talk about the regulatory requirements and the documentation. Before we jump in, I want to say a quick thank you to Vicki Davis. These webinars are funded by USDA, and Vicki was the one that obtained the grant to do this. So thank you to Vicki. There are a number of webinars that we've recorded previously that are out on the Upper Valley Lake Centipede Regional Planning Commission, that's a mouthful, on their website, and I'll provide that address to you. It's also in the chat. So if you want to go and review any of the other webinars that we've given over the past few years, you're welcome to them. I just want to take a quick minute to say thank you again to my mentor, my dear friend, Dave Waddell. We lost him about almost 2 years ago now, and I really miss him. But he was really one of the founding people that started this Rehab the Lab program throughout the United States to help schools manage old legacy chemicals in particular. Now, over the next few months, we're going to address the chemical hygiene plan. I call this the Chemical Hygiene Lab Safety Plan. It's an OSHA plan that's required for labs, and we'll talk more about what labs is defined as by OSHA in the upcoming slides today. This series predominantly focuses on regulatory requirements, so it's really dry, and I'm sorry about that, but I'll make it as understandable as possible. We do have some very tough regulations that we have to meet working in schools, and so we want to make sure that you're in as good a shape as possible. And frankly, it's not just about checking the box on those regulations and having those plans sitting on the shelf. It's about going through the process and understanding where the risks are in your classroom or in your facility, and how you can mitigate those risks, how we can eliminate or minimize those risks significantly to protect you, to protect employees, to protect students. Overall, I want you to think in the back of your head about the whole chemical management plan, which is procurement or purchasing of chemicals, use of them, storage of them, and ultimately of disposal of those chemicals. That's what we're really addressing, all of the pieces and parts to make sure that we're going through all of those steps as safely as we possibly can. So quick little information on Zoom today. We do have, we will open the chat for questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to add things in if you'd like. I will stick around for a few minutes after the presentation concludes and try to answer as many questions as I possibly can. Also, there's a disclaimer on here. So we are in July of 2026, and the information that I'm giving you today is current as of the rules and regulations in July of 2026. So if you're watching this in the future, I want you to make sure that you're checking what current regulations require. We do see regulatory changes. We just had a recent, very large update to the hazard communication plan. And so they change. And so to make sure that you're in compliance, please verify that the regulations have not changed since this webinar. And this is information that's conveyed to you to the best of my ability. Please know that I am doing this live, and every once in a while I do screw up. I will try very hard not to do that and to provide you with as much quality, understandable information about these topics as possible. All right, so quick view of our previous webinars. So previously we talked about what are legacy chemicals, how do we define that? Remember, those are chemicals that have been sitting on our shelves for a very, very long time. We've seen them on average. I consider legacy chemicals typically from the 1940s and 50s, but we see them all the way through every decade since 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Wow, that's a long time. And those chemicals have been sitting on the shelves, just kind of slowly degrading. And they present us with a great deal of risk. So our first couple of webinars were defining legacy chemicals, giving you some tips on how to identify them, and then giving you some recommendations on the best way to manage those chemicals. We talked about a strategy for inventory, disposal, and then prevention. We don't want to be the ones to purchase now those chemicals that 50 years from now will end up being legacy chemicals. So a good, solid procurement plan. We talked about using the HAZCOM program or Hazard Communication Program effectively. So how do we read a safety data sheet most effectively to be able to assess risk quickly and very efficiently and also very effectively? How do we review those safety data sheets and the risks with the chemicals to make sure that we're not bringing excess risk into our classrooms or our laboratories? And then since in the last couple of webinars, we've been focused on regulations and requirement and how to start building an effective team. I like to focus these teams at the district level. I think it's really important that we build a system that integrates from the district where policies and procedures are created and passed along down to the schools, to each department, and then to classrooms. I think that's the most effective way of doing this. I do understand and recognize that we have some districts where that's just not possible for whatever reason. I also recognize that we're very short on a lot of resources in schools right now. And so my primary focus to you today is going to be how do you take these two very cumbersome, robust plans and break those down into small pieces that you can get done a little bit at a time. Those small steps towards compliance really have a positive impact. And so instead of looking at it and becoming overwhelmed as, oh my gosh, when am I going to have time to do this? We're going to break it down into little pieces, little bite-sized chunks that you can take care of during a planning period at the beginning of the day, or possibly even as tasks you can assign students as learning exercises. If you want to take a look, the other thing I've got to talk to you about is if you have watched the prior webinars and you know you have legacy chemicals, this is the time of year. So this is July. We've got a lot of teachers that are probably not spending much time at all in schools right now. But this is the time of year that everybody gets the itch to kind of go into their lab storage areas, pile a bunch of stuff that they don't want into boxes and roll it on carts down into their facilities department and say, hey, I don't want these things, please get rid of them. I've already had this happen twice in the last 2 months at a school that I'm assisting. Please don't do that. It's very dangerous. Your school facilities people are not familiar with the chemical risks. They haven't been trained in that. And frankly, what we see is we see a lot of incompatible chemicals that are often piled together in the same box, and it creates an extremely high risk of fire, of chemical interactions, or of exposure. So please don't do that. don't go in and start piling the legacy chemicals that you don't want into boxes. The other thing is that some of those legacy chemicals should not be moved after this amount of time. So if you know you have a lot of legacy chemicals and you do want them out of your lab storage room, work with your facilities to develop a plan and bring in a professional to come in and clean them out for you. Please just don't put them in boxes and roll them to facilities. Creates a lot of danger. If you want to learn more about this and about that process, we've got links on the screen here. We can also send those to you. So if you send us an email at the end of the presentation today, we can get those links over to you so you can take a look. So today's webinar, we're going to do a quick review of safety data sheets. Again, we've talked about safety data sheets a lot, but I've had a lot of questions come in about some of the specifics about what do I have to find, what do I have to keep for safety data sheets, and then how do I build that safety data sheet library that I need to have accessible all the time? Is a paper copy acceptable still? Is an electronic version acceptable? Those are the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the different documentation requirements, and we're going to focus on the hazard communication plan, or the HAZCOM plan. That's the way that most of us refer to it as. And we're also going to talk about the chemical hygiene plan. Now, I skew the chemical hygiene plan just a little bit, and I add in the words lab safety. The chemical hygiene and lab safety plan is one of the toughest sections of OSHA, one of the toughest plans to get right. There are a lot of sections to it. So we're going to talk about a little bit of it today, and then over the next 2 webinars in August, we're actually going to break it down section by section, help you with some of the language, and help you with some of the focus on how do we get that plan written. We're going to talk about defining roles and responsibilities, and what do we do in hard situations? For example, if you're a brand new teacher, you're new to a district and you don't know where to find any of this stuff. What if you've been in a district for a long time and the district just doesn't have any of these resources? Can you build these just for your classroom? And the easy answer is yes. You can also build them at the department level. We'll talk about that a little bit and give you some guidance on that. And then we're going to talk about preparing to write the chemical hygiene lab safety plan. What are some of those documents that you can be pulling together? What are some of those concepts that you can be defining now with your safety, your school safety team, so that that'll be easier. It'll be easier for you to complete those plans. Now, we always start off with a demonstration of competency. So this is a little 3-question quiz. And I'll give you the answers to these at the end of the presentation today, but this information builds off of what we've covered in prior webinars. So question 1, true or false? Schools must have a printed safety data sheet for every chemical. Question 2, true or false? Only schools in states with OSHA programs are required to have a written chemical hygiene plan. And then question 3 is true or false? The lab standard only applies to science labs. And we'll go through the answers to those at the end of the presentation today. All right, documentation that we'll review. These are some of the things that we're going to talk about. And again, we're only focused on 2 of the primary plans that you have to define for your school, for your district, for your department, for your lab. Okay, 2 of the programs. So the first one is the OSHA Hazard Communication Program. And I'm going to stop here for just a minute and say, you know what? I really wish that I could say, under these circumstances, this is when you have to have an OSHA Hazard Communication Program and an OSHA Laboratory Standard Program. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. We've gotten really convoluted all throughout the nation on who needs to have the plans and who doesn't need to have the plans. And it's based on whether or not your state has a state OSHA program, or whether you are operating simply under the federal OSHA program, or whether your state has adopted a hybrid approach, some federal, some state. So we've got to stop here. I'm going to give you the regulations for if you have a state OSHA program, or if federally you're operating under the federal OSHA program and your state has adopted certain parts of it, you're operating under a hybrid program. You need to take the time to understand clearly whether or not your school, your lab is subject to the OSHA regulations or not. So please make sure that you understand whether or not in the state that you're in, you have to have the hazard communication program or you have to have the laboratory standard. Not all states necessarily as public school entities require these plans. I'm going to tell you though, I think they are good plans. I think they are beneficial to you and they will keep you and your students and your coworkers safe if you have the plans. So I'm going to encourage you that regardless of whether or not you fall under those plan jurisdictions, whether or not you are required to have these, I would encourage you to build them into your programming and go ahead and draft them and have them available to you. And again, it's not just checking the box that we have or don't have a plan written. You can download a template and do a find, search, and replace and stick your school's name in very easily. The process of going through and understanding these pieces and parts will help you identify risk and mitigate risk in your classrooms. It will make chemical management much safer, and it will also hopefully help to prevent accidents in your classroom, bad days in your school. All right? So make sure that you understand clearly what the expectations are from your state. And simply call into the regulators and ask. Call your Department of Labor, call OSHA, ask them, I'm in this state, I'm in this city, what's required of me? All right, we're going to jump back into what are the two programs we're focused on today. The first one is the Hazard Communication Program. This is detailed, or this is written in the 29th chapter of the Code of Federal Regulations, chapter 1910-1200. That's where the Hazard Communication Program is. Hazard Communication Program addresses things like and requires things like an inventory of the chemicals you have, safety data sheets, labels, written plan, and employee training. The next one is the requirements for the OSHA laboratory standard. This is located in the 29 CFR 1910-1450. This addresses things like the definition of a lab, not just for science, also the requirement of a chemical hygiene officer, and the requirement of a chemical hygiene lab safety written plan with associated standard operating procedures. It also addresses things like employee exposures, medical monitoring. It's a very robust standard. There are actually 8 sections to it. And over the next 2 webinars, we'll break that down. We'll cover sections 1 through 4, and then sections 5 through 8. And again, overall in the back of your head, I want you to keep in mind the focus, which is proper and safe chemical management from procurement all the way through disposal. All of these OSHA plans are interrelated. The big giant one that's most robust, in my opinion, is the OSHA lab standard. The written program under the OSHA lab standard is the chemical hygiene plan. We also have the hazard communication plan. All of these relate back and forth to each other, and in one way or another, they reference the other OSHA programs that are important, such as personal protective equipment, respiratory protection, and hazardous waste operations and emergency response. What we have found over the years of trying to comply with these and meet all of these requirements is that a system approach works best. If we can build the policies at the district level, then we can and build these plans at the district level, then each individual department, each individual school, and each individual classroom can be identified and can build their own SOPs that are really targeted at how operations are going to happen within the classroom to keep everybody safe. The lab standard actually came after HAZCOM. So the hazard communication plan was in place legislatively. And I'm paraphrasing, and I'm going to take a few liberties here. But OSHA was kind of looking around and said, you know what? Labs are more dangerous than general industry. In general industry, we want to make sure that companies are conveying the information about the hazards associated with the chemicals they're working with to employees. Hence, they developed the hazard communication plan. Parts of the hazard communication plan include keeping an inventory of all chemicals, having safety data sheets accessible, and also making sure that all chemical containers are labeled with appropriate information so that at a glance, anyone can identify risks associated with those containers. OSHA reviewed that program and said, you know what, labs present a unique risk. In labs, we have small quantities of very dangerous chemicals, potentially. They tend to be more concentrated than what we see in general industry. And so we need to build a program, a lab safety standard that addresses those specific risks. The interesting thing is, as HAZCOM was in place, the lab safety standard came in and it reiterated some of the information that's required in the hazard communication program, but it added a lot more to it. Now, most recently, we haven't seen the lab standard updated, but we have seen the hazard communication program updated. So make sure that you're familiar with the most recent version of the hazard communication program. In the lab standard, we really ideally want to run this at the district level because it is integral to so many different departments. The lab standard and the associated chemical hygiene plan, chemical hygiene lab safety plan, is applicable to any place where we have small quantities of a large variety of chemicals that are not being used in production. I'm going to talk more about this because it's really critical that you understand it's not just focused on science labs. Schools specifically in standard operating procedures can define how they are managing such things as broken glassware, as hazardous waste, storage requirements. The SOPs that we're talking about here are less administrative and they're more operational to mitigate risk. So when I say we're going to build a chemical hygiene plan, excuse me, I'm doing it too, a chemical hygiene plan with associated standard operating procedures, those SOPs are targeted at defining how we're going to mitigate or minimize risk in the classroom when we're working with these chemicals. It's very overwhelming if we try to look at both of these plans and sit down and say, okay, you know what, we're just going to get all these written in an afternoon. That is not going to happen. I will tell you, you'll get overwhelmed and you'll get frustrated. It's a much better approach if we take it and we build them out a piece by piece by piece. And then we also build in at that same time the details of how we are going to accomplish these tasks, specifically for our classroom, school, or district. Please make sure you also understand, again, I referenced those state codes can be a little different. Please make sure that you understand specifically what's required of you. Let's start with HAZCOM. The HAZCOM plan or Hazard Communication Plan is the plan that's required that helps us convey information to employees about how we safely handle chemicals and where the risks are located. In our prior webinars, we've talked about legacy chemicals, and we've talked about identifying them, disposing of them, putting in place a procurement SOP so that we don't have them build up again, understanding disposal requirements for both solid waste and hazardous waste. And then we've also looked at identifying what are the useful chemicals that we want to keep, building an inventory, and storing them by compatibility. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about inventory development because I think a lot of you are probably in that place right now. Recommendations for inventory and this, I tend to get a lot of folks that can get really, really, really in the weeds on this. They'll want to weigh, if it says it's a 500-gram container of copper chloride, they'll want to weigh that 500-gram container and they'll go, oh, wait, no, I only have 150 grams of it. So I'm going to put 150 grams down. And at the school level, we know that probably 4 or 5 classrooms may be using copper chloride out of that individual container. It's very hard to track who took 5 grams, who took 25 grams. So instead of doing that, make life a little easier on yourself. Put that in your inventory as one 500-gram container. And don't worry about how much is actually in the container. Once a year, go through then and evaluate. Do I still have one 500-gram container? All right. Well, is it getting low in the bottom? Do I need to order another one? Okay, then I'm going to put in 2 500-gram containers. So do a container count. You don't need to do a gram count on how much chemical is present. A container count once a year is perfectly adequate to meet that inventory requirement. I'm also going to encourage you, especially those of you that are running lab stock rooms or art classrooms, art studios, to use what we call the DOT method. And I've used this previously and discussed it in prior webinars. Basically, what this means is you hang a bunch of these little dots all over your storage, your chemical storage area, and you say, hey, everybody on our department team, anytime you pull out a container to use it, put the dot color of the year on top. Let's say 2026, the 2025-26 school year was red dots. And we're going into the 26-27 school year, and that's going to be green dots. If we get to next May of 2027, and we pull down a container and it's got a red dot and a green dot on top, we know people are using that container. If we get to the end of that second year and we have no dots on the top of the container, we're going to give it one more year and see. And if no dots appear on that top of that container, we know that that container has been sitting untouched, unneeded for 3 years. It's time to consider disposal. So DOT method, very easy way to track, also allows you on a container basis to help make sure that your inventory is accurate. Once a year, you need to inventory. The schools that I find are most successful and the businesses that I find are most successful and making sure that the inventory is up to date are ones that don't just sit down and try in an afternoon to do a cross check with all the chemicals on the shelf, but they take one shelf at a time and inventory one shelf at a time. Make sure that you're including the product name and the chemical name if they are different from each other. This is more applicable to things like art and facilities management. And we have some templates that we can share with you on how to most effectively inventory what information you need. And we're actually working on a comprehensive inventory with safety data sheets attached with it. Hopefully it will be done here in the next couple of months that we can share it with you so you won't have to enter in all of the chemical names. You'll simply have to put a count in and a quantity size. So if you've got 3 containers of 500 grams of ethanol, you'll put that in the container count. Ethanol will already be present in the spreadsheet. All right, the next piece is building your safety data sheet repository. So how are we going to make sure that those safety data sheets are accessible to everybody? I would encourage you to go ahead and do a paper copy, the 3-ring binder with the hole punch, keep it in your classroom because it's really easy to access that information that way, especially for students. And even though students aren't covered under OSHA programs, they're students, they're not employees. We want to make sure that students also have accessibility to this in the event that there's an emergency. Electronic copies are perfectly acceptable, but everybody needs to be able to access them. So if you are going to go strictly with an electronic system, please make sure that it's accessible to everybody at all times. It's pretty critical. Remember, as you're pulling together your safety data sheets, that the following items you don't have to have safety data sheets for. If you are purchasing things that are consumer items, let's say you use 3% hydrogen peroxide that you get at the pharmacy, 3% hydrogen peroxide in your classroom to do an experiment. Technically, you are not required to have a safety data sheet because that's a consumer quantity. As long as you're not using more than one 500 ml container every 6 months or so, that's a consumer quantity. And as a result, you are not required to have a safety data sheet for any consumer use consumer quantity product. I'm going to challenge you a little bit though and go, you know what? But if we have somebody dump 3% hydrogen peroxide down the front of them in a lab setting, aren't we going to kind of want to know what the risks are with that? Are we going to, we probably will need to know if we need to stick them under a safety shower and then have medical treatment. So even though we have that exclusion, I would encourage you for some things, 3% hydrogen peroxide's best example I could come up with, that you'll want to have that safety data sheet available to you. It's not required by law, but it's a good practice or a best practice. Hazardous waste is not required to have a safety data sheet. Food and pharmaceuticals are not required to have safety data sheets. But again, think about, would it be helpful to you in the event of an emergency? Would the information be useful? And then make your decisions accordingly. When you're building a safety data sheet repository, I think it's a really good idea if we look at this at the district level. And frankly, there are services where you can purchase whole collections of safety data sheets. I have a lot of industry clients that do this. I think it's an easy way to manage it. And a lot of times that service will come with things like telephone stickers so that you can call in and have someone read the safety data sheet information to you in the event of an emergency. There are also several free safety data sheet search databases. Chemicalsafety.com is one of the best that I've found. It's a really good one. And they have a large variety of safety data sheets available to you. If you're in facilities or if you're working with a vendor that's supplying you with specific chemicals, ask if they have a collection of safety data sheets that they would provide to you. I think that's a really good option. One of the things I have on my to-do list is to reach out to Sigma and say, hey, you guys have all these fabulous safety data sheets. They're well written. They accurately reflect risk. Is there any way we can get the whole repository so that anybody who's buying any Sigma chemicals can access them very easily? It's on my list to ask. It never hurts to ask. Common safety data sheet challenges, and I just had a long discussion with a colleague of mine who's a certified safety professional. And I said, hey, what about if I'm just getting in hydrochloric acid, right? And I get it from one manufacturer and their safety data sheet is kind of lousy, but I go out to Sigma or a different website and I can download a really good high quality safety data sheet. Do I have to have one for the specific manufacturer of the chemical that I purchased? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. OSHA is very focused that the manufacturers are required to draft safety data sheets for consumers that are purchasing their chemicals. And therefore, you should be able to reach out to that manufacturer and get the safety data sheet for the exact chemical you're using. That does not necessarily mean it's going to be great quality. And I'll tell you that some of our manufacturer safety data sheets are pretty lousy. What I've done and what a lot of my industrial customers do in that instance is to checkbox the requirement of the law. We will keep the manufacturer's safety data sheet in an electronic file, but we will also get a good quality safety data sheet from a different manufacturer, and we will keep both of those. Is it a pain in the rump? Yes, it is. It's a pain. It's challenging to have both of those. I wish all of our manufacturers issued out good quality safety data sheet, but they just don't. So have one that will on-site that will be useful to you, that if in the event that you have an emergency, it will provide you with good quality information. That's really my bigger focus. What if the manufacturer only has old safety data sheets? Boy, this is a really big frustration of mine. We have one primary manufacturer of school science, I'm going to call them kits. And when you go out to their website, and they tout themselves as extremely safety focused company. And when you go to their website, their safety data sheets have specifically revision dates that are from 2014. So they have not updated those in 12 years. It's very frustrating. And this is one of the predominant companies that a lot of schools purchase from. I think it's wrong. They're going to tell you, well, the information doesn't change. Well, but the requirements of the law do. And I want to make sure that in your safety data sheet, that it accurately reflects what the requirements of the law are. 2014, we've gone through at least two iterations of the Hazard Communication Standard or the HAZCOM plan since then. So I guess this is a message to those manufacturers. Please update your safety data sheets, even if it's simply to just change the revision date to the current year, if you don't change anything else. One of the interesting things I found when I was researching this is I found a school district and they had downloaded those safety data sheets from 2014. And on those PDFs, they put a box on the front of them that said, school district evaluated HAZCOM plan in 2025. This is the latest version from the manufacturer. And they stuck it right on the front of the safety data sheet in a box on those PDFs. That reflected that that school district was responsible enough that they updated their HAZCOM plan. It's required to be reviewed annually or as chemicals change or as conditions change. That school district updated that hazard communication plan, and it was the manufacturer that was still behind the eight ball, so to speak. I thought that was an excellent approach because it shows the school's due diligence to maintaining an accurate and current hazard communication plan, even though the manufacturer is not helping with that. Pretty frustrating. What if I order a chemical and I don't get a safety data sheet? I'm going to say, you know what, it's a requirement that you have that safety data sheet information on your site. I would make a note in your inventory that says manufacturer didn't provide a safety data sheet, and I would find one from another vendor, another manufacturer, and I would keep that one. I would also probably send a pretty stringently worded email back to that manufacturer and say, hey, I like your product, but you're not in compliance with the law. Please fix it. Written plan implementation. So writing the hazard communication plan, this is a general plan best written at the district level. I understand that that may not be possible. It creates, when we write it at the district level, it creates the expectation that we will maintain at the school and at the department level, we'll maintain an inventory of chemicals, safety data sheets, and we'll label things properly. And if the district lays out that expectation, then what I find in schools is that the schools then step up and say, okay, these are the things that we're going to do. It also defines responsible parties so that if something does go sideways or we have a problem, it defines that hierarchy of who's responsible. The hazard communication plan, you can certainly use existing models. You can use AI to draft them. It's actually a really good use of AI. I will tell you though, AI misses nuances. So please, even if you use that as a starting place, please make sure that you're customizing it and that you're validating the information for your specific district. Part of the hazard communication plans, my recommendation is that you also include a procurement SOP or a procurement appendix to it so that we can actively prevent buildup of future legacy chemicals. We want to make sure that we're not leaving the next generation headaches and heartaches with chemicals the way that they have been left to us. If your district does not have one, you can certainly write one for your school or for your department. It's more challenging that way. Ideally, we want it from the district to roll down to the schools, to roll down to the departments, to roll down to the classrooms. Keep in mind that OSHA is all about risk mitigation for employees. While we want to keep our students safe, this plan is designed at making sure that our employees know at a glance what the risks of the chemicals are they're using. The chemicals are labeled properly. And if they need more information about the chemical hazards, they have access to safety data sheets, not students. Now, this is one that I would encourage you to write down these sections. This is the format that I've been using for my industrial customers for a few years now, and it seems to work really, really well. The very top, we put in just that header that addresses what version is this, who's responsible for implementing it, who's prepared it, all of those details that if an OSHA inspector were to say, hey, I want to see your HAZCOM plan, you can hand it over to them and they can see immediately at the top what the details of the plan are and how old that plan is, when the last revision date was. Again, this plan needs to be evaluated annually as conditions change or as chemicals change. Okay? Purpose, we start with the purpose, needs to be concise, direct. We don't need to put the history of OSHA in here. I see that happen a lot with school districts, and I'm going to encourage you, leave it all out. Concise, direct, no history. The scope of this is a short plan for each school. It can contain details for multiple departments. So the scope is typically, again, at the district level is where we'd like to see this written. If you're writing this for your school alone, you can define what the scope is for your school. Responsibilities, this is a critical section, and this, if there is a problem, this is one of the areas that attorneys will take a look at to find out what that hierarchy or that chain of command is. So please make sure you take the time to define who is responsible for what different pieces and parts. Also, if you're going to write this, if you're a department level person and you're going to write this for your school, please make sure that you run it by your administrator before your administrator becomes the sole responsible party. I have seen instances where schools have been surprised with that. It's not a good situation. The next is procedures. And in that procedure section, we're going to put in how is the inventory managed? How's it kept? How are safety data sheets collected, updated, and managed? We're also going to put in what are called non-routine tasks. So in the event of a spill is nothing that's routine, but in the event of a spill, how are we going to use HAZCOM? How are we going to use the components of HAZCOM to identify the spill? We're going to look at the label. We're going to pull the safety data sheet and look at the risks and the guidance for spill cleanup. And maybe we're going to pull our hazardous waste plan to evaluate how we get rid of stuff. And then define procedures for labeling. This is one of the biggest challenges that I see both from a legacy chemical perspective as well as current use in schools. We have not a lot. We have some instances where labels are just really not adequate. Please make sure you understand the labeling requirements. We've covered it in previous webinars, but understand the labeling requirements. And please, even if you're testing your students on, let's say, unknown A, B, C, D, please clearly define what A, B, C, and D are, and don't just leave those flasks, beakers, test tubes for future teachers to have to guess what they are. Please don't do that to the people coming up through the chain after you. Training needs to be defined in the hazard communication plan, define who's required for, frequency, when it's updated, and what topics are addressed. And again, typically, hazard communication training occurs one time during onboarding. I'm going to encourage you to update it every year, annual training. Program evaluation. So define how are we going to audit and inspect to make sure that we do have safety data sheets in place for everything, that everybody is following the labeling requirements so that we don't leave a mess for people coming behind us. And then associated documents and references. This is the section of the written plan where we provide links to appropriate code citations or OSHA interpretations. And then finally, the last section is the revision history. We want to make sure that we can clearly communicate that we've had this plan and we've updated it accordingly over the years as HAZCOM regulation changes have taken place, and as we've changed chemicals and conditions in our classrooms. If you set up a format with all of these sections and use it for all of your different plans, it makes plan writing much more easy. And if you want some help with that, reach out to me. Documentation for HAZCOM. We have to have standard operating procedures, and these are things to define how we're going to manage our SOPs, how we're going to manage our inventory. They don't necessarily have to be included in the HAZCOM plan. They can be referenced in appendices. If we build them so they're referenced in appendices, we can use those same appendices for our chemical hygiene lab safety plan. It can be the same SOPs that are going back and forth between both plans. It's a really good, efficient use of time. We want to address things like labeling, inventory management, safety data sheet management. Employee training, we want to make sure that if we have lab techs or paid student workers, that we include them in training. Frequently see that they are not included in training, especially like at the high school level. So please make sure that they're included in training as well. Again, it's required to be annual training or as changes occur. Typically, I see schools set this up as annual training. Make sure that you also define in the plan how employees can access the whole plan, whether it's on a web page, whether it's a hard copy. Make sure that you define that for employees. And then your procurement review, I'm going to ask that you include that as part of your hazard communication plan too, just because in an SOP format, just because we want to make sure that that we're not creating that legacy chemical problem for other schools or for those coming after us. Once we've completed all those sections, woo, we've gotten HAZCOM done. Roadblocks over the years that I've heard, when am I supposed to get this done? And again, this is at the district level. I'm going to encourage that it be completed at the district level. It's tough. I know everybody is spread very, very thin. That's why it's best to break it up into small pieces. Inventory a shelf at a time. Create your safety data sheet repository, an alphabet letter at a time. Today we're going to do A through C. Tomorrow we're going to do D, E's, and F's. Build that repository. It can be electronic. It's acceptable for it to be electronic now. And then at the same time that you're doing that, you can print off your pages. It's also acceptable to make this a student project. So maybe at the end of every school year, in those last couple of weeks where there isn't much going on, I come from a long line of teachers. My daughter's a teacher, my brother's a principal, my sister's a teacher, my parents were teachers. In the last couple of weeks of school, maybe we can take students through an exercise where we have them update the inventory, download the safety data sheets, create the repository, and we can teach them how to read the safety data sheets. Those are skills that will carry them very, very far because all of our industry expects people to know how to do that. Strategies for success on this: small steps have big impacts. So if you can just get one shelf done at a time, if you're a new teacher and you're just walking into this overwhelming chemical stockroom, one shelf at a time, one chemical at a time. Be careful. Divide and conquer. Work with your safety team or your department team. Don't reinvent the wheel on this one. This is a great area to start with a template or start with an AI document. Hey, Claude, build me a hazard communication plan for my high school chemical stockroom. AI is a great option, but use caution. A lot of times AI gets confused. One of the things that AI doesn't discuss is when we talk about hazard communication or lab safety or a lab chemical hygiene plan, It focuses very heavily on science, and that's not the way those plans are designed. And then rely on vendors. If you're buying all of your facilities chemical from one vendor, ask that vendor, hey, can you just drop everything to a flash drive and give me all the safety data sheets I'm going to need? Easiest way to handle it. Why do we do all this stuff? So it is a checkbox, it is a regulatory requirement, it is the law. But aside from that, we do this so that we can understand and dialogue around what the risks are. If all of a sudden you're sitting in a departmental safety meeting and somebody says, you know what, I decided I wanted to bring in some sodium cyanide to mess with. There are more than one person then that can go, wait a minute, why are you bringing in sodium cyanide? That is really high risk. Do we really have to use that chemical? As we talk through the program and we build the parts of that chemical hygiene plan or the parts of that hazard communication plan, we can identify risks. We can discuss what's an appropriate risk for our school, for our district, for our department. And then we can also identify gaps in, do we have a working fume hood? If we're going to be working with methanol, boy, that's got a low flash point. It's very volatile, highly flammable. And on top of that, it's really toxic. If we don't have a working fume hood, we probably shouldn't be messing with methanol. So that's a gap. We don't have that safety measure in place. Probably need to find a different experiment. Eliminating those gaps minimizes those high-risk activities, and it minimizes bad days and scary events. Documentation leads to preparation. Preparation can then lead to risk mitigation and minimization. When I started working with Rehab the Lab program, it's about 20 years ago. And one of the first things I did was I'm from Iowa, and in the state of Iowa, we had one predominant insurance company that covered all the schools for work comp and property and casualty liability. And I approached that insurance company. I said, hey, we've got a really big problem with legacy chemicals, I think. Stuff that's been sitting on shelves for 40, 50 years. I've been getting a lot of calls from teachers asking for help. And they said, yeah, we're aware. Well, that's really a school problem. Those schools need to buck up and get those out of there. And they didn't really want to engage. About 6 months after that initial conversation, I received a call from them, and they said, well, we had a problem. We're going to get a little more engaged now. There was a school fire. School departments were moving from an old school into a brand new school. Super awesome. And they had their science teachers box up chemicals, a lot of legacy chemicals. At that point in time, we didn't even have a name for them. We didn't know what to call them legacy chemicals. We just knew they were old, decrepit, nasty chemicals. But the school was tasked, the department was tasked with moving them from the existing stockroom to the new stockroom. So they boxed them all up. Facilities was supposed to go down, pick up the boxes, and take them to the new school. Well, as they were sitting there, because they weren't boxed by compatibility, one of the boxes caught on fire. And there was nobody in the school. The school had been emptied for the summer. And because the school was being shut down, it was an old school, but they had plans for the building. And ultimately, there were several $100,000 in damage to the school. This is a picture from the fire department down there. Happened in Kansas. Thank goodness nobody was around. But unfortunately, there was extensive damage to the school. The insurance company became engaged and went, you know what? We probably need to have some programming around this. And for the next 10 years, we worked closely together, hand in hand, going throughout Iowa. And we ended up removing and helping schools remove more than 500,000 pounds, 535,000 pounds plus of legacy chemicals, high-risk chemicals. But it took that fire for them to be engaged. I don't want the same for you. Again, we're going to do small steps, inventory a shelf at a time, identify what you want to keep, and then build your hazard communication plan your safety data sheets and your inventory around those chemicals you're going to keep. All right, I'm going to have to start talking faster. We're getting to the end of our time here. So this is a review of the OSHA laboratory standard. I'm going to tell you, this is the detail that we see in the lab standard. It's a very robust plan. So I'm going to transfer it and summarize it in more easy to understand terminology. Basically, the OSHA lab standard limits employee exposure. That's the big threat. So we want to limit employee exposure. It appoints a chemical hygiene officer. There are some really specific requirements that a person in the chemical hygiene officer position does. You need to be aware of those requirements and you need to really pay attention to them. So this isn't just an easy add-on to a facilities manager's title, for example. There are some specific requirements that a chemical hygiene officer has to meet. It also requires maintenance and upkeeping and initial drafting of a chemical hygiene plan. Now, as I've told you before, I call this the chemical hygiene and lab safety plan. I find that teachers get very confused about why we're documenting student hygiene. Okay, not. It's a chemical hygiene lab safety plan. And this standard, which is kind of the umbrella over the top of everything, requires training and information for teachers, minimizes teacher exposure or employee exposure. It assigns the chemical hygiene officer, and then it requires the chemical hygiene lab safety plan. When we're preparing to write the chemical hygiene lab safety plan, there are 8 sections to it. Today, I'm going to show you the components, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview because for the next 2 webinars, we're going to dive deep into these. Documentation, these are pieces that the pieces of information in red are things that you can start building now as you prepare to write or update your chemical hygiene lab safety plan. Introduction section is going to consist of introduction and responsibilities, purpose and goals. Again, we want that concise. We do not need to chug out the history of the lab safety. OSHA knows that. What is the purpose for your district? And what are the goals for your district wrapped around this lab hygiene, chemical hygiene plan? What are the code compliance requirements? And then critically, and this is really a big piece, what are the definitions associated with the chemical hygiene lab safety plan? One of the first places we're going to start are what are the definitions of a lab? A lab is focused on small quantities of chemicals, a large variety of chemicals not used in production. If you have an area in your school or your district that meets those 3 criteria, facilities. Those facilities meet the requirement to have a chemical hygiene plan. Not really, because we typically see larger quantities of chemicals. And we don't see a huge variety of chemicals. Art department. Does the art stock room need to have a chemical hygiene or need to be part of your chemical hygiene lab safety plan? Well, they got a lot of different variety of chemicals. They're usually in pretty small quantities and they're not used in production. So yeah, art studio probably needs to be part of your chemical hygiene lab safety plan. Automotive, career and technical education, all of those different lab areas where students are working with small quantities, large variety of chemicals, not in production, those need to be part of your chemical hygiene lab safety plan. We can start pulling together standard operating procedures for general lab practices. The SOPs for general lab practices, these need to be less administrative and more focused on mitigating risk and managing things safely. We can have an SOP for how we're handling broken glass. We can have an SOP for how often we're checking the fume hood. We can have an SOP for how are we handling inventory. Oh, wait a minute, we did that for the HAZCOM plan. Hey, look at that. We've got same SOP we can use for 2 plans now. Those are the types of things that we want to work on. Also, we want to identify what safety equipment we have in place, what the maintenance schedule is on that, who's responsible for that. How do we know that it's being kept up so that it works when we need it? Parts 5 through 8. These are some of the different pieces and parts: training and information. What practices require prior approval? And we can start by including our SOP for procurement. If we're going to buy chemicals, we want to make sure that we understand that we're not creating legacy problems for the future. We're also going to put in there maybe an SOP on how long do we keep chemicals. We may want to write up a short little SOP on our DOT system for how we're tracking how old chemicals are. All other parts of the chemical hygiene lab safety plan include medical consultation and exams, and an evaluation of what OSHA calls particularly hazardous substances. We're going to spend quite a few minutes on those 2 sections in our upcoming webinars. Those are really critically important for you to understand, and they're also why I would recommend that this plan be written, if at all possible, at the district level. This is overwhelming. There's a lot of pieces and parts. I'm hitting you with a ton of information today, and the language is confusing. OSHA does kind of speak a different language than most normal human beings. So it's tough. Where can you go for help? One of the best resources that I found over the years, and I've used these folks for 20 years, is the Lab Safety Institute. And I am not a paid person that represents, I'm not on their staff. But I will tell you, they provide you with exceptional resources. And one of the things that you can sign up for as a teacher, you can sign up for a 1-year membership for $25. And it stays at $25 when you renew it. 1 year. And you get access to a ton of their resources that are free. They will, if you send your chemical hygiene plan into them, they'll do a 10-point wellness check as part of that membership and tell you where, are there glaring missing problems with your plan. They also have all kinds of free resources, little mini training videos, and they also offer a 30-minute discussion on either safety issues, and in addition to that, a 30-minute discussion on a virtual lab tour if you have specific lab questions. They are very focused around science labs. That's what they were founded on. But a lot of the concepts and a lot of the free resources are applicable to a lot of different areas of a school. I've even got some of my industrial customers that are going to start looking at them. Really, really good quality resources and current up-to-date information that can help you. $25 membership, I just kind of went through it again. They also have member-exclusive webinars that they provide, and they've got a list of them out on their website. Those are accessible to you for that $25 membership as well. The next 2 webinars that we conduct, we're going to dive really deep into the chemical hygiene lab safety plan. There are a lot of free templates out there. I see we had a question about, Flynn Scientific has a chemical hygiene plan. Great. I will tell you, I would start with either an AI chemical hygiene lab safety plan, or I would start with a template from a college or university. I find that they are extremely well written. They cover all 8 sections very thoroughly. If you sign up for the $25 membership from the Lab Safety Institute, you also get a free template to use and build, and it does have all of the sections very well defined. I would encourage you to join Lab Safety and use their template over perhaps other vendor templates. I think it's more thorough, and I think it's more comprehensive, and I think it meets the criteria of the OSHA criteria. I'm Hazardous Materials Consulting is the name of my business, and I also offer, as part of this webinars, a 30-minute free consult. And I offer a fee-based service where I can help you write a chemical hygiene plan or a hazard communication plan. I can also help you with an inventory review and assessment. I can skim an inventory pretty darn quickly and tell you what are EPA regulated chemicals. What I can't tell you necessarily quickly is what are the regulated environmental regulations for your particular state, but I can find them out and help you with them. And I can also tell you which ones are solid waste and can just be thrown in the trash when you're done with them. All of those are fee-based, and if you're interested in any of that, please reach out to me. Now, demonstration of competency. So answers to the questions I asked you at the beginning. So true or false, schools must have a printed safety data sheet for each chemical. False. Consumer available, consumer quantity, and consumer use chemicals. And then there are some other exclusions. You do not have to have a printed safety data sheet for those. In fact, they're excluded. You don't have to have any safety data sheet. It's also acceptable if your safety data sheets are electronically stored, as long as people can access them. Second question, true or false? Only schools and states with OSHA programs are required to have a written chemical hygiene plan. False. State requirements are tricky. Make sure that you do your research and determine, are you in a state that has to have this? If you are not required to have it, I'm going to still encourage you to think about how valuable it would be, not just to have the plan on the shelf, but to go through the process to evaluate risk and define how you are mitigating risk around chemical management. And then finally, the lab standard only applies to science labs. False. If you're in an area of the school or the district that has small quantities of a large variety of chemicals that's not in production, chances are you're subject to the chemical hygiene plan. Steps to take today: meet with your chemical safety committee. If you don't have one, start working to get one. District level is best, but each school can also have a chemical safety committee, and I would encourage that. Establish safe, compatible storage for chemicals in use. Once you have those legacy chemicals gone, you'll be amazed at how much your chemical stockroom opens up, and then you'll have the space and the organizational ability to store them by compatibility. Finish the inventory of the chemicals you have in use and start drafting your hazard communication plan. Again, section by section, just do it, a small methodical process. Begin to build your safety data sheet repository or update it, and make sure that you've reflected in your plan that you've updated those safety data sheets. And then attend our next couple of webinars on August 4th and on August 18th. We will be talking about drafting the chemical hygiene lab safety plan. All right, that's what I've got for today. Here is my contact information. You're always welcome to send me an email or to reach out if I can help you. Again, with participation in the webinars, you get up to 30 minutes per school district of assistance. So let me know how I can help. Do we have any other questions?